Welcome to What's New in Web Accessibility. My name is Rob Dodson. I'm a developer advocate on the Chrome team. In a minute, I will be joined by my teammate, Mr. Dominic Mazzoni, who's an engineer on the Chrome team. Today, we're going to be covering two big topic areas. The first is I want to spend some time talking about some new tools we've been working on in Chrome DevTools to make testing accessibility a bit easier. In the second half, Dominic will be up here talking about new APIs that we're working on to make building accessible components and applications easier. So a lot to cover. Let's dive into this first topic, accessibility testing. Now, if you've ever done an accessibility audit or review of a site before, you know that there's a lot of things you need to keep in mind as you're doing that work, right? It's probably too much for any one person to keep in their head, so oftentimes we'll go and we'll create checklists. We'll create spreadsheets to make sure that we're covering all the important topic areas. We're not leaving anything out. But even going through those checklists can be sort of error-prone, right? If your team is shipping code really fast, there's a lot of manual work that has to go into the audit. You might miss some things. There's possible opportunities for regression, things like that. And so to really scale this work, what we want to do is figure out ways we can automate the process of testing accessibility so that it just becomes part of every developer's workflow. It's part of their daily habit. On the Chrome side, we do this through a tool called Lighthouse. So Lighthouse runs a set of automated tests against your application. It'll test for things like SEO, best practices, and accessibility. And the coolest thing about Lighthouse is that it's integrated directly into Chrome's DevTools. So it's basically a thing that every developer is going to have access to. They don't have to go to like a special place or a special tool to get access to it. It's right there in the browser. And it's basically a single button click, and they can get a high-level overview of how they're doing on their site in terms of accessibility. So what I wanted to do today was actually walk you through my process for auditing a site using Lighthouse. I want to show you some of the things that we've added to DevTools to make it easier to verify and fix some of the issues that Lighthouse brings up. So if we can switch over to our demo machine. So this is a site that Dominic and I have been working on called Pupperino. I feel like it's a pretty good site, right? So it's for dogs and their human counterparts. It's kind of like a lifestyle site, so you can go through and you can buy things like this sweet hat, human disguise, right? You can rate stuff, learn about the latest in dog fashion, things like that. So I feel like Dominic and I have done a pretty good job on this site to pat ourselves on the back a bit. But I want to go in a bit now and see how we're doing in terms of accessibility. So I'm going to open up my DevTools. And up here in the top right, there's sort of this double arrow thing that you may see. So if I click on that, I can open up the audits panel. Inside the audits panel, I'll see the Lighthouse logo. And there's a couple other things that I want to point out here as well. So up in the top right, there are some drop-downs here. This first one lets us decide what kind of site emulation we want to use when we're running Lighthouse. By default, Lighthouse wants to test your site in its mobile version. But we can also now set it to test the desktop version. It'll also, by default, be set to run on 3G with a slowed-down CPU to simulate running on lower-end mobile hardware. But in this case, because we're just testing accessibility, I'm going to set this to no throttling because I don't need the test to run any slower or anything like that. Now I'm just going to click the Lighthouse button, and it's going to present me a number of things that I could test against my page. Again, performance and progressive web app, a lot of really cool stuff in there. The only one I'm going to do this afternoon is accessibility. So I'll click Run the Audit. And under the hood, Lighthouse is running about 30 or 40 tests against our site, checking for a bunch of common accessibility issues. It's using an open source library called AxeCore, made by our friends at DQ to do this. So we on the Lighthouse team, we contribute back to AxeCore, and we take it, we roll it into this tool. Once it's done, it's going to give us kind of a report card that looks like this. So there's a lot going on in this report card, and I want to walk through it kind of piece by piece. So up in the top right, it's giving me a score of 81. So we're doing OK on this site, but there's definitely some room for improvement. One of the other things it's going to point out to me is that while Lighthouse can do some good automated testing against your site, there are some things that a machine can't really check that well. And so we always recommend you go through and you do a manual audit as well. And if you're really not familiar with how to do that, down at the bottom, we include a section on additional items that you can manually check. So if we open that up, you can see that there are a number of things inside of here, a number of drop-downs. Each one of these links out to a doc that'll explain, if you've never audited a site before for keyboard support, here's how you do it. But let's look at our results that we have here. So we have, it looks like we have about 3 errors that we need to work on. And I'm just going to kind of go through these one by one. So the first one here says we have some elements that have insufficient color contrast. So meaning we've got some elements where the background and the foreground colors, that sort of, when the foreground text is laid over that background, it's possibly difficult for some users to read. So one of the nicest things about having Lighthouse just like right here in DevTools is I can click on these nodes, and I can then go and inspect them over in Chrome DevTools itself. So I can look at it in the Elements Inspector. I can scroll the element into view. I can see that it's this span here. So if I zoom in on that, I've got this article with this dog. The article topic is sticks and how great they are. And you can see that I've got some grayish text on a white background. And Lighthouse has signaled to me that, like, hey, this might be difficult for some users to read. Now, color contrast it's kind of a tricky thing, right? It's somewhat subjective. What is legible to some users may not be legible to other users. And so in order to take some of the subjectivity out of the discussion, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines defines a set of color contrast thresholds that we're always trying to meet. And these are referred to as WCAG AA and WCAG AAA. And the thing about these thresholds is to actually compute them requires a fair amount of matrix math and stuff like that. It's not the kind of thing that someone can just easily do in their head. It's not the kind of thing where you can just sort of look at a color necessarily and eyeball it. But it's the kind of thing that machine is really, really good at identifying for you. And so one of the things we've added to Chrome DevTools, if we go down to our little style panel here, if I zoom in on the styles that I'm applying to this element, the color style that's defining my text color, if I click on that, I'll get this color palette. And it'll tell me right here what my current contrast ratio is, which in this case is 3.54. And it's got a little red slash to indicate that, hey, something's going on there. And if I click on this disclosure widget, there's a little drop down here, it'll give me some more information. So now I can see the WCAG AA and WCAG AAA ratios that I'm sort of aiming for, 4.5 and 7.0 respectively. The other nice thing that it does is up here at the top, it's created this line, this sort of curved line across my entire color palette to indicate sort of where the minimum color threshold is that I need to meet. And so if I just grab the color picker and I drag it to the other side of that line, you can see that it's updating here. So now this WCAG AA line item has got a green check mark next to it, right? If I drag it even further down, we see that WCAG AAA also has a green check mark next to it. And now up here at our contrast ratio, which is now 15.8, we've got 2 check marks. And honestly, if I just zoom out a little bit, I feel like those tags at the top of those articles are a lot easier to read now as well. Now, the other cool thing we can do with our color picker, if I scroll down a bit, is here I've got this article with this Afghan with some really rad hair. And this is pretty hard to pick out, but I've actually got some text over this image. So this one says hair. This one by the puppy says sleeps. And if I inspect these elements, and I go look at them over in my style panel, click on the color swatch, this time it's not identifying a contrast ratio for me. And the reason is because our text is sitting on top of a background image. So if we click our disclosure widget here, it'll say, hey, I can't just sort of pick out the background color for you, right? There's not a CSS background color that I can identify. But it'll give me access to an eyedropper. And I can just go find sort of the most representative color in my image, so whatever is sort of right behind my text, and click on that. And now I get my color contrast line drawn in my color palette again. I can see my contrast ratio, which is 2.69, so definitely needs some improvement there. And I can also see my WCAG AA and AAA thresholds. Now in this case, since we're going from darker to lighter text, I just grab the color picker and drag it to the other side of the threshold line, right? And now I feel like that text is a lot easier to read on those elements. So that is the new color picker in Chrome DevTools. Let's go back and look at our audit here and see what else we can work on. So the next item that Lighthouse has pointed out to me is that I have some links that do not have discernible names. All right, so let's see what's happening here. So I'll click on this element again. I'll right-click to scroll it into view. OK. And so the element in question here is up here at the top right. I have this shopping bag icon that someone can click to check out, maybe if they bought something on the site. And what Lighthouse has said is basically hey, that element that you're using there, that might be a good enough visual affordance for a sighted user to let them know if they click on this, right, it'll take them to their shopping cart. But you haven't provided any sort of text or text alternative. So someone using assistive technology like a screen reader may not be able to identify what that control is for. So let's click on this element here and see if we can improve upon it. Now, in the past, if you wanted to test this kind of thing, you might need to fire up a screen reader, navigate to this control just to figure out what the screen reader is even announcing as fallback content. One of the cool things that we've got in DevTools now is this new accessibility tab, which is down here right by our styles panel and other things. So I click on that. It'll give me a lot of interesting information about this control. So let me zoom in a bit so you can see that a bit better. So it's telling me a number of things. First, it's telling me the computed role for this control in the accessibility tree. So since we're talking about an anchor tag in this case, its computed role is link, right? So that means someone lands on this with assistive technology like a screen reader, it's at least going to say that it's a link. We can see if there's any aria applied to it, which in this case there is not. And then down here at the bottom, we can see its computed name, which right now is just empty quotes. And the reason is because we don't have any text content, we don't have any aria, we have nothing on this control. So the interesting thing about this, and what I really like about this panel, is it kind of almost tells me how I can fix this problem, right? Because it's saying here, is like a title attribute or text content or aria label. It's sort of explaining to me how text computation works or name computation works. So I can go up to this control, and I'll just add an aria label to it. And we'll say checkout, OK? So now our panel has updated. Now our element has a name of checkout. Still got that computed role of link, right? So we can see in the accessibility tree, if someone were to land on this, it would say something like checkout, link. OK, it's a much better experience than just telling someone it's a link and not telling them where it goes. The other cool thing about this is, again, it sort of teaches us how name computation works in the browser. So for instance, if I were to add perhaps a less important attribute to this, like a title attribute, so I just give it a title of like foo. If I go back down to that panel, I can see that that title attribute that I added is actually being overridden by the more important, more specific aria-label. So now you can actually understand, which is more important, aria-label, aria-label by, which one of these things is going to win if I put it on my control. The panel itself is pretty cool. It's pretty powerful. Some of the other interesting things we can do with this is let's go look at maybe a more advanced control, like the star rating widget. So I'll inspect the star rating control here. And if I zoom in on it in my elements panel over here, you can see that there is quite a lot of markup associated with this control. So this is a custom element. It has tab index, it has role, it has aria value min, value max, value now, et cetera, value text, et cetera, right? Like a lot of stuff going on with this widget. And if I'm just working on this control, I'm adding all those aria attributes myself, I may not always be confident that it's working as I expect it to. And in the past, what I would have to do is sort of fire up a screen reader, go check it, right, and kind of constantly go back and forth in my dev flow. But what I can do now is I can actually just use the accessibility panel down here, and I can see, OK, I'm putting aria attributes on this thing. I'm adding a role to it. Is this working as I expect it to? And so I can see that, yes, I gave it a role of slider, and yes, that corresponds to its computed role. I can scroll down, and I can see all the computed values from all of those aria attributes that I used. So for all this aria that I used here, here is what ended up getting computed in the accessibility tree. So a lot of information there to help you as you're developing. One last thing I want to show off, just because I think it's really neat. If I go to the parent of this control, and I add an aria attribute like aria hidden equals true. Whoop, there we go. Aria hidden equals true. OK. And I go back and I inspect that star rating widget. The panel is actually going to tell me that this node is no longer exposed because aria hidden is true on one of its ancestors. So this is actually a bug that I have encountered on a real site. I actually worked on the IO site a couple of years ago. And when I was working on that site, the IO site itself is it's huge, it's pretty complicated. Someone left an aria hidden way high up in the page. And I spent literally an entire day turning on my screen reader, trying to navigate and figuring out why is half the site being skipped. And it's because I didn't have a panel like this to just tell me, oh, hey, someone left an aria hidden somewhere. So instead, I had to just read through the HTML for most of an afternoon. I thought it was a screen reader bug. I thought it was a Chrome bug. Eventually, it was oh, someone left an attribute there. So now we can quickly identify those issues just using this panel, which I think is super, super helpful. All right, let's switch back to our audit. One last thing I want to show you is this error here where it says we have some roles that are not valid. So we've got some invalid aria roles on a control. Let's click on this element and see what's going on here. So we'll scroll it into view. And if I zoom out a bit, OK. So what's telling me is this button down here in our product of the month area this add to cart button has some sort of invalid role being applied to it. And again, I can use my accessibility panel to inspect what's happening in the accessibility tree. So in this case, I can see that they've used a div to build this control. Already a little questionable since it's a button, but OK, let's go with this. They've got a role on it. And if I look in the accessibility tree, I can see that even though they've added a role, this element's computed role is generic container, which is basically the role that we use as a fallback if you're using like a div or a span or any sort of just like grouping element thing, right? So even though they tried to add a role, it didn't seem like it worked. And if I scroll down a bit more and I look in my aria attributes section, maybe some of y'all can pick this out. They added a role, but they maybe misspelled it. So instead of button with 2 T's, they used 1 T, bâton. Maybe they used the French spelling. I don't know. So let's add an extra T and fix that. OK, and now in our accessibility tree, the element is showing up correctly. We can see that it's got a name coming from its text content and things like that, right? So I think we've made Lighthouse happy. But I'm sure some of you out there are thinking like, hey, dude, like the first rule of aria is don't use aria. Like if you can avoid it, just don't use it, OK? So maybe we can make this an even nicer experience. Maybe instead of adding this like role to this control, let's get rid of the role. And instead of using a div for this, let's use an actual button element, right? OK, now it actually like renders a bit better even, right? So this is probably a nicer experience just across the board. It's probably going to work better with a keyboard even, right? Because you use a button element. If you have an on-click handler, someone focuses the button and hits spacebar, it'll run your on-click handler. That's kind of a unique, very cool behavior that button elements have. You don't get that from using a div or a span or anything for a control. So yeah, I bet it works better with a keyboard. Let's try it out, right? So let me tab through this. And so I'm like tabbing around, but I'm not actually seeing any sort of focus indicator, which is weird. So all right, no fear. Let's inspect the element again. We'll switch to our Styles tab. And I'm just going to force a focus style on this control to figure out what's going on. And I'll go and I'll look through the styles that are being applied when the element has focus. And uh-oh. All right, maybe some of y'all have seen this one before. So they have gone in and they've applied focus outline none to the entire site. All right, so let's see what's up with that. So I can click on that and inspect it in my CSS inspector. And what's this comment up at the top? So it says, Noah, our designer, says this has to stay, or else it looks ugly. All right, cool. All right, Noah. So maybe some of you have had this debate before within your team. Focus outlines can be one of those contentious things that people butt heads about. Someone using a mouse, they might click on a control like a button, especially like a custom button. They might not be expecting to see a focus outline. And so suddenly they see one. They're not sure, is the control broken? Is it stuck? Did I break something? They might file an issue against the site, right? On the other hand, if someone's using a keyboard to navigate your site, focus indicator for them is incredibly important. It is acting as their mouse cursor. It is telling them what they are about to interact with on the page, right? And so you want to make sure if someone needs a focus indicator that they actually get one. Otherwise, it's as if you've just hidden their mouse pointer, right? And that would be super annoying. So one of the things we've been working on is a new CSS pseudo class to see if we can improve on the current state of focus styling. Because right now, it seems like we're often at an impasse. So we've been working on a new pseudo class, which is called focus visible. And focus visible matches when focus matches, and the browser has decided, based on a heuristic, that it'd be beneficial for the user to see a focus indicator. So for instance, if the browser can tell that the user was just navigating with a keyboard, it's going to say, hey, you know what? They would probably benefit from seeing a focus indicator in this case. So let's give them one. That means then, if it's only going to show up if the user is using a keyboard or something like that, then we can make a really noticeable, really good focus style. Because the other thing that happens is when people try and go halfway on this, they end up creating these really watered down focus styles that just aren't actually that effective or good. So in this case, we can actually use a pretty good one. So let's do outline 4 pixels dashed dark orange, something that should be really, really noticeable. And I'll go back to my control here. And as I'm tabbing, I have a very clear focus indicator being applied to all of my controls as I'm using the keyboard. Oh, yay. And then we can differentiate. If someone's using a mouse, right, it's not going to apply it in that case. And you can be very selective about how you apply this. Now, the other important point is that, as I said, this is using kind of a heuristic built into the browser, which means a user could go in, and though we have not done this yet, this is where we'd like to go. A user could go in and add, maybe like a user preference setting in Chrome itself, or maybe they set some preference at the operating system level where they say, hey, look, regardless of my input modality, regardless if I'm using a mouse or a keyboard or a stylus or whatever, I always want to see a focus indicator because I find it very helpful for me. It helps me maintain my context on the page. So the user could go in, set that setting, and then we could force focus visible to always match. Right? So there's a lot of opportunity to do cool stuff there. All right, so that about covers it for our Lighthouse audit and for focus visible. Can we switch back to the slides now? All right. So if you're interested in focus visible, you can actually try it out today. So it is behind a flag in Chrome 67. So if you go to Chrome//flags and enable experimental web platform features, you can use it just as I was. We also have a polyfill, which is available, so you can try it out on your sites today and get cross-browser support. So this is up at github.com/WICG, which stands for Web Incubation Community Groups. So github.com/WICG/focus-visible. So definitely go give it a shot, try it out on your site. If you have issues or if you just have feedback on the direction of the standard, please come leave those comments on the GitHub on the GitHub repo. We really, really want that feedback. That's why we're doing it in the WICG this way. If you're interested in what we were talking about DevTools-wise, we have docs for that as well. So that is up at bit.ly/devtools-A11y. So this is going to cover everything I was talking about today. There's also some video tutorials that'll walk you through all the same things I was talking about this afternoon as well. So that about covers it for my half. Now to talk about the future of web accessibility APIs, I want to invite to the stage my teammate, Dominic Mazzoni.
Thanks very much, Rob. What I'd like to talk to you about today is the accessibility object model. This is a proposed JavaScript API that we've been working on with our friends at Apple, Mozilla, and others in the web standards community. Now, what this is an API to allow you to modify and explore the web accessibility tree. And here's the problem we're trying to solve. If you're building a native app right now, you can build custom elements, and you could even do an entire custom-drawn UI. And if you want to, you can make that accessible using low-level primitives that allow you to basically create your own accessibility tree and respond to events and customize the whole experience. And some advanced apps do that now, but it hasn't been possible on the web. So the accessibility object model is going to solve three problems. The first is to fill in the gaps in ARIA. ARIA is what we have on the web right now. If you're building custom elements, if you're doing custom things on the site and you need to make them accessible, and it works in many cases, but there are some things that native elements can do to be accessible that you can't replicate with a custom element. So we need to solve that. The second thing is that if you're doing this custom UI like I was talking about, if you're just drawing things in a canvas or WebGL, SVG, or even you're just using DOM elements in a unique way, it's not always easy to make those accessible without lots of hacks. And what's really needed sometimes is just the right API to say, I want to write my own accessibility for that. And then finally, the AOM will let you poke at those accessibility properties from within JavaScript and test them and see how they're being computed and explore the accessibility tree from your page, but hasn't previously been possible from within your own page. So that's a broad outline, but I think the best way to explain all of that is really to give you some examples. So Rob showed this star rating gadget on the page, and I'd like to go into a little more detail and dive in to see how we can improve the accessibility of this. So let's go back to the demo machine. So here's the star rating gadget, and Rob already showed you what the HTML for this looks like, but the first thing I'd like to do actually is just view the source for this page. I'm going to search for the word star, and I'll scroll on this a little bit. So you can see that this is a custom element. In fact, the only thing in the HTML, it just says star rating, and there's an aria labeled by so that it's associated with some text on the page. This is great. This is the beauty of custom elements, right? All of the style, all of the behavior is encapsulated inside this tag, and that's great. But what does it look like when we inspect this? All these extra attributes were sprouted. It's got a role and aria value now and all these other things. Where did this all come from? Well, I mean, you know where it came from, right? This is to make it accessible, but it's a leaky abstraction. let's go back to the slides for a minute. So this is what we had in our HTML, or this is the API for this custom element. You just create a star rating, and you can optionally pass it a min, a max, and a current value. Everything else is supposed to just work. But instead, it sprouted all these extra attributes. We got aria-value min, aria-value max. All that. This all makes sense to make it accessible, but it's kind of ugly, right? It cluttered up our DOM. The code to create this custom element looks something like this. We're attaching the shadow and the constructor, and when this is connected to the page, we're setting all these attributes on the host element. That's pretty much the way you make something accessible. But it's not very convenient, and it's kind of ugly, and it gets in the way of things developers want to do. So with the accessibility object model, you'll be able to write something like this instead. We'll be able to set properties directly on the shadow root. Now, this has like 3 advantages that I see. The first is, this actually makes accessibility feel like a first-class citizen. Instead of just calling set attribute and wondering if you spelled things correctly and auditing it later, you're actually setting properties directly. You can autocomplete these in developer tools. You can directly check these in your favorite IDE. And the second is that it's going to hide this leaky abstraction. So now all of these accessibility properties are encapsulated inside the custom element rather than leaked to the embedding page. And then finally, this allows the author to override. For example, if the author adds that aria-label by to associate this label with this control with the label, or if they want to change some of the properties or something like that, they can do that and not confuse the attributes they added with the ones that are kind of intrinsic to the custom element. So this is great. So this improves a lot of the problems of encapsulation when it comes to custom element accessibility. But there are more problems with custom elements. So what happens if we try to access this same web page on an Android phone running TalkBack, and we tap on this star gadget?
0%, 0 stars, slider. Use volume keys to adjust.
So notice TalkBack said, use volume keys to adjust. This is a nice feature that TalkBack has. If you land on a slider, instead of needing to use gestures to try to control the value, you can just use the volume keys. When you're focused on something else, the volume keys go back to normal. But this is a nice feature. Now, previously, it hasn't been possible for a web application to interpret those keys properly, because it's not about the web application listening for the volume keys. That'd be the wrong solution. TalkBack is the one that's listening for the volume keys, and it's sending an action to the running app saying, hey, increment or decrement the value of their current control. But if the web app doesn't have a way to listen for those specific events, it can't respond. So the accessibility object model adds some additional types of events. So in the code for the star rating gadget, we've got like some event listeners now, like a key down listener that might listen for the left and right arrow keys in order to change the value of that. And next to that, we can add a couple of extra event listeners, accessible increment and accessible decrement. And this allows us to listen for those specific events that the native slider was already handling. And now we can build a custom slider that does the same types of thing. Let's see what this looks like on Android now.
0%, 0 stars, slider. Use volume keys to adjust. 20%, 1 stars, slider. 40%, 2 stars, slider.
So there you go. Now I have to fix that bug where it says 1 stars. But aside from that, we've now kind of solved some of the accessibility issues, and we can make a custom element that has the same accessible properties that a native element does, which was a gap. Let's do one more thing. Let's actually do some testing on that. Let's go back to the slides here. So previously, it would be really hard to write a unit test for this or to explore this without using some external tools or popping out developer tools. And we'd really like to be able to do this right from within your own JavaScript or right from within your own tests. So I'm going to show you a new API here called getComputedAccessibleNode. And it's asynchronous, and so I'm going to put await there. And this is going to return a computed accessible node object. And this is kind of analogous to how you have style and computed style. The getComputedAccessibleNode is telling you not sort of what attributes were set on this, but after the browser interpreted those in context and parsed them and tried to make sense of them, what did it come up with in the end? And so we can query its role. We can query all of the aria attributes like value text and stuff like this. And this is showing us that this is working correctly, and we can actually write tests for this behavior. We can even do feature detection. So I could, for example, try setting the role to something that's relatively new in the aria standard that I'm not sure if it's supported yet. And then I could use computed accessible node to see if that role was returned back to me, indicating the browser actually understood that. Or if it didn't, then I could run some fallback code that's going to be supported in other browsers. So there's one last piece of the accessibility object model that I was talking about, and that is when you have really custom UI. So let's go ahead and rate this awesome human disguise and say, my dog loved it, and submit a review. And we get this cool 3D animated chart. How are we going to make something like this accessible? Now, I want to be totally fair. This is the type of thing that comes up all the time, right? You've got some content on your page, and you want to make it accessible. It's perfectly reasonable to say, I'm going to provide alternate access to this. I'm going to provide a data table with the same information as that bar chart. I'm going to link to that for everyone. Maybe we should do that also. But sometimes we actually just want to take that content and make it accessible and make it actually work with assistive technology. Wouldn't that be cool if we could do that? So let's go to the slides for a moment. Essentially, what you often end up with is you've got the DOM that looks something like this. You've got some elements that are already accessible, some paragraphs, images. All those are working fine. But then you've got a canvas. It doesn't have to be a canvas. You've got some element that's like a black hole for accessibility. Everything in that subtree is not accessible, and it's not really something that you want to make directly accessible, right? It's custom drawn. And so what you really want to be able to do is just add your own accessibility tree. Just create some elements. You want to control where they're positioned. You want to control their behavior. And you want to say, if someone is using assistive technology, this is the semantics. And if someone is not using assistive technology, then they get what's in the DOM. And they can kind of coexist peacefully. And that's the experience we want. So here's how this looks in the accessibility object model to make this bar chart accessible. We're just going to create an object for each bar. So let bar equal new accessible node. It's like we're creating an accessible node out of thin air. And then we're going to set attributes on this. We're going to set properties in JavaScript. They're basically analogous to aria attributes. So we're going to set the role. We're going to set the label by appending some strings together. And then we're going to append this as a child of an existing element in the DOM. And we're still working out the details of what that syntax should look like. And then because this element is completely virtual, we need to give it a bounding box. So we're going to set the offset left, top, width, and height. And we're going to set the offset parent. That allows us to use whatever coordinate system is the most convenient for us. And then finally, we're going to add an event listener. And so that way, even though this is a totally virtual element that's not corresponding to the DOM, it's going to be visible to assistive technology, and we can receive events directly on this element. So let's go back to the demo machine one last time here and see how this actually works. I'm going to turn on VoiceOver, the built-in screen reader for Mac OS, and try to interact with this.
VoiceOver on Chromium, main, link, a dog howl, let submit review button.
OK. I'm now going to use the VoiceOver right arrow to navigate into this chart.
5 stars, 355 votes button. 4 stars, 3 stars, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars.
So there you are. You can see there's an outline around these elements. It's describing the element. There's a button so I know it's clickable. It's giving me the label I want. This is a really great experience. Notice that this is not in the DOM. This is a custom accessible experience I've made. It's going to work for screen reader users, for users with switch control, all different types of assistive technology. And we can really customize it however we want. And we can even click on these elements and get some different behavior.
Press 5 stars. Best purchase I've ever made on this site. SJ8.
So there we are.
VoiceOver off.
I think this is really cool, right? This is just a very simple and dumb example, but I think there's a lot of great possibilities. There are a lot of websites out there that are doing some really cool things with sort of really custom-drawn canvases. There are sites that are giving you access to things that are built using WebAssembly or running on a different machine, or that have been ported from old architectures. And there are sometimes ways to make those accessible, but you don't want to create a bunch of DOM elements. You really just want to create a custom accessible experience for that. And that's what the accessibility object model is going to provide. So let's go back to the slides here. If you're interested in the accessibility object model, you can try out a lot of the stuff that you saw today in Chrome. There's a command line flag. You can also try out some of this in Safari Technology Preview. Some of this is also being implemented in Firefox right now. The best place to start, if you're interested in this, is just to find the spec on GitHub. So github.com/WICG, that's Web Incubator Community Group, /AOM. If you go there, you'll see the explainer, which is kind of the most up-to-date version of how we think the syntax is going to look. You can file issues if you have ideas for things you'd like to do with this, if you'd like to tell us things that you're interested in, problems you're interested in solving, or if you find bugs in implementation or in the spec or something like that. There's also a Can I Use page that gives you a really quick summary of what's implemented in all the browsers right now. We're actively working on this, but what's implemented tends to lag behind the proposed syntax. So it'll give you an idea. If you really want to try a demo in Chrome right now, what syntax should you use, even though it might differ a little bit from the direction we're trying to go in with the API. So check that out. We'd love your feedback on that. That wraps up the stuff that we're going to be talking about today. There are some more sessions on accessibility tomorrow. There's sessions on inclusive design, applications of neuroscience, and some smart hearing stuff in Android. And we'd also love to talk to you in the Accessibility Sandbox in Dome F. We've got office hours, but really just drop by any time. We'd love to hear what kinds of things that you're working on and answer any questions you have and kind of have a great exchange about accessibility, web accessibility, mobile, all those types of things. So with that, thank you very much for coming. This is Rob Dodson. I'm Dominic Mazzoni. Thank you all.